Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. So if you were with us last time, we were diving into this challenge of having conversations around money with different people who are in different circumstances. This is something the church struggles with, Big C Church struggles with all the time, because we can't really aim one message with a lot of practical application to three very different audiences. And last time we talked about lanes 1 and 2. The way we think at Good Sense is there are the people who are in trouble and they know it. That's lane 1. They feel like they're failing. They feel like they're falling behind, and they are really scared and full of shame around how they've handled their money. And then you have lane 2, and they're the people who are in trouble and they don't know it. And so lane 1 needs kindness and hope and aspiration towards stability, and lane 2 needs a little bit of tough love to shake them and wake them up to the fact that they need to act with clarity and intention in their decision making. Lane 3 is a very different conversation. Lane 3 tends to be, the way we think of it, are people who are not in trouble. They are doing fine with money. They're accumulating. Their net worth is growing. They're earning at a very high level. Many times, they're the ones actually that we struggle with the most to engage in a conversation with them, because particularly if you are a pastor or you're a stewardship pastor or you're in leadership with your church, you would assume that lane 3, those people know more about money than you do. And so it's really not your place to step into that conversation because, they know what they're doing. You don't. Well, that is a really destructive thought. We need to recognize our job in leadership is to guide people in their discipleship to Jesus, that they would be better followers of Jesus in all aspects of their life, that they would be closer to him, more intentional with him, more aware of what he's up to, and more willing to join him in what he's up to. And a lot of times, lane 3 individuals are being bombarded with money conversations that are mostly about, can you give us some? Because everybody knows that they have it. But they need a much deeper dive conversation. They need a recognition that their security and their value and their status and their power and their significance don't come from their money. Lane 3 individuals are struggling with all the same things that lane 1 and 2 individuals are struggling with at a high level. They just have more money. And so a lot of times they can mask those issues. They can hide what their heart conditions are because there's an abundance of resources that allow them to continue to make decisions that are destructive or that are self-indulgent or that are moving them towards more and more of a falling in love with money. And it gets masked and hidden in our society because it's celebrated. And so for many of us in leadership, this particular conversation is the one we're most afraid of having. But in many cases, it's the one we need to step into with confidence, because these are families that are in positions to make deep, lasting impacts for their children, for their grandchildren, but also in the kingdom. And so we really want to make sure we're engaging in this conversation and not avoiding it. Don't check out here. Don't step away from this discussion because you think they know more than you do. You need to call them to faithful stewardship. It is your job, your role in church leadership to call all of your community to a faithful stewardship of God's resources. And lane 3 is included in that. One of the difficulties that we see with a lot of this particular conversation around stewardship is that most of the content out there assumes that the people we're talking to have credit card debt. It assumes that they're struggling. It assumes that they're unable to budget, that they're unable to spend with intentionality, that they're really bad at this. And so most of the content we use as churches doesn't address lane 3, because lane 3 is good at all that stuff. They tend to not have a tremendous amount of credit card debt, if any. They probably don't. They're accumulating their net worth efficiently. They track their spending. They tend to minimize and manage their spending. They are recognizing when things are a waste of money and they don't do it. They're able to control those urges and those tendencies that most of the content is aimed at putting fences around. They don't need those fences. And so every time we bring up the topic of money, and if it's particularly aimed at financial management, lane 3 checks out. They say, I'm good at that. I don't need that. But what they need is still those same 6 ideas. And so that's why I love what Freed Up is teaching. We are stepping into this conversation with the whole church. I don't care what lane you're in. You still need to know these 6 concepts. And those 6 concepts are that we need to step into a stewardship mindset, not an ownership mindset, that freedom is found in stewardship, that faithful stewards are diligent earners and prudent spenders, that they are generous givers, wise savers, and cautious debtors. Now, here's the problem. For lane 3, they tend to be diligent earners. Sometimes they're relentless in their earning. They tend to be prudent spenders. They tend to pay attention. They know where their money is going, and they make decisions with it with some level of intentionality. That's why they have extra, because they're not spending every dollar that comes in. The generous giving conversation can certainly be an issue. A lot of times they believe that as long as they're tithing or getting close enough to the tithe, that they're doing enough. And what we argue at Good Sense is the tithe is a great place to start in lane 3. It's a terrible place to stop. Keep going. What else is God calling you to? How far can you push this? Be as generous as possible, because our tendency when we hit the minimum is to give ourselves permission to then hoard or overaccumulate or spend the difference. And what we really want to engage lane 3 with is this idea that the generous heart of the Father is that we would go beyond. We have enough for future obedience. We have enough to be prepared for what's ahead. And so we really don't need to save this. And we really don't need to spend it. So let's give it now. Let's go past the 10%. Let's go way past the 10%. If we can, let's have fun with it. Let's join what the Lord is up to and be as generous as He is. So lane 3 can unlock so much more than a tithe when their heart is captured by the way that God loves others and wants them to join Him in loving them. The way that I tend to approach that conversation is I'll ask someone, not for money for the church, but I'll just simply ask, what makes your heart ache? What are the challenges out there in the world that bother you? Because I do believe that each of us has a part of our heart that is bothered. And all of the things that bother me are different than maybe the things that bother you, and that's by design. God has placed His piece of His heart that aches for different things in each of us so that we will be activated in doing the work that He wants us to do in those areas. And so what's yours? What's the specific thing that really bothers you in the world? Is it poverty? Is it hunger? Is it medical issues? Is it education? Is it sex trafficking? There's so many problems that the world is facing. What is the most painful for you? Now, what organizations are fixing that? Who's going after that problem? Who's trying to make it better? Who's trying to save people, rescue them, give them what they need, provide for those who are impoverished or hungry? Who's doing the work? What are you most compelled by for those who are doing the work? And then what do those organizations need? How can you more deeply partner with them, come alongside them, see that they are doing the work you really care about, and then empower them to do more of it, right? Because when we can connect the lane 3 family's heart that God has placed in them with the work He's doing, the question doesn't become how much should we give? The question becomes how much can we give? We move away from this 10% idea to something that goes so much further beyond that, because if we can, why not? Let's do it. Let's keep going. And so this is the beauty of that lane 3 conversation. When we can engage a lane 3 family and not be asking for our building fund or our operating fund or what we need as a church, but simply be asking them what makes them come alive, what makes them burn with a passion to go and fix something, to go and be part of what God's up to, we can awaken in them a desire to go deeper into faithful stewardship than they've ever been. Because one of the most important aspects for lane 3 is drawing lines that don't allow them to build bigger barns, getting them to a place where they've decided this is enough. I'm saving enough. I'm spending what I want. I have contentment and beauty in my life. I'm experiencing the things I want to experience, and I don't need more. Most of the time, the default mode of lane 3 is when they get more, they just save it. Because if they're not spending it, if they've got that under control, they might as well just throw it on the pile. The problem is that is the story that Jesus tells in the parable of the barns, where the farmer brings in more than he needed, more than he could have ever imagined he would have. And most lane 3 people, when they were just getting started in their career, they would have never expected that they would be in the situation they're in. And so it's a natural tendency to go, well, I guess I'll just build bigger barns. And they continue to build bigger and bigger barns and accumulate more. And it's not that the farmer had barns. That was reasonable. It was that he built such big barns to hold all of his abundance for himself so that he could tell himself he could check out, that he could be lazy, that he could be completely disconnected from the kingdom's work, that he could sit in that self-indulgence and eat, drink, and be merry and do nothing of value. And I believe that is the direction that a lot of lane 3 families are heading. If they don't have this conversation, they'll just naturally drift into over-accumulating and having more than they ever dreamed they would have for no reason. They just have it. It just accumulated on them. They didn't even see it coming. They didn't plan on it. And they don't have a thought of what they should be doing with it or what they could be doing with it, because their natural tendency is just to keep hoarding it and keep saving it. This is John Rockefeller's famous quote when someone asked him, one of the wealthiest humans ever to live on the planet, they asked him, how much is enough? And he said, just a little bit more, because more is always better, right? But if we can engage these lane 3 families in the concepts that we teach around drawing lines and setting boundaries and saying this is enough, they are already preparing well for future obedience. But are they stepping into it? Are they actually honoring the Lord when he says, do this, do that, be part of this, fix that problem, be engaged in this cause? Are they stepping into it because it's something that they're compelled by? Are they stepping into it simply because somebody knocked on their door and asked them for money? And they feel guilt that they have money. They feel a sense of burden by their money. We need to flip the script. We need to engage these families in a different conversation that calls them to an awareness that when the master, when the owner of these resources, according to the parable of the talents, gives these resources to his servants to manage, the expectation is multiplication. The expectation is you will do something with it. And a lot of times, lane 3, even though it's getting bigger, they're doing the equivalent of burying it in the sand. They're just putting it in a pile over there somewhere, and it's growing, but there is stuff that's happening that God is asking them to join him in, and they're not doing it because they're not aware that they can. They don't feel compelled or obligated to step into that obedience, even though they've prepared for it. And so the lane 3 conversation is totally different than lane 1 and 2. But it is still really important that we step into it. Just because they're doing well financially does not mean they are faithful stewards. And that is a really hard statement for us to believe. They clearly know how to do it, so what am I going to offer them? What we are offering them is the joy and the delight of relinquishing ownership and stepping into stewardship. the joy and the freedom that comes from drawing lines that say, this is all I need, and everything else is available for God to use however he wants. And I get to then link arms with the King of the universe to do the work he has called me to do right now, not someday when I'm convinced that I have more than I need, or that I, accumulated so much that there's extra. They're already there. They just don't know it. I talk about this idea of a floor and ceiling problem, and Lane 3 struggles with this a lot. Somewhere way back when they were young, they said, man, someday when I have X amount of money, let's say it's $5 million, man, if I ever get to where I have $5 million, I'm going to give a ton away. I'm going to be super generous. I'm going to be, traveling the world, doing all the things. It's going to be great. And now they have $10 million and they're not doing any of it. And how? How does that happen? Well, the answer is because now all of a sudden that $5 million that they thought was the ceiling has become the floor, and they're standing on it. And now if it goes down, that means I'm failing. That means I'm in trouble. That means I'm sliding back. It's a number they never dreamed of actually having. And now they've somehow allowed it to creep so far beyond it, and more is always better. There's this inertia to it. It just keeps growing, and they just keep throwing it on the pile. This is the issue that we face with these Lane 3 families, is they don't know what God is calling them to. They don't recognize that he has given these resources to them to manage for his purposes. And that does not mean we need to guilt them and shame them and tell them they need to give us more. That is so disingenuous, and it's part of why they're afraid to engage in this conversation. They don't want to talk to people about money who might ask them for some. And so that's why it's so special for us to step into these discussions with these families and have it be about them and the unique way that God has wired them, and the beautiful things that God may be calling them to. That is not about, hey, we need money for our thing, or we need money to fix this problem with our building, or we need to raise money to pave the parking lot. Those are all things that happen as a church body, and that's okay. But if that's the only time we're engaging these Lane 3 families, then we're not actually leading them. We're using them. And I know that's hard. I know that's heavy-handed, but I think it might be the case. We're not leading them because we're not engaging in this conversation. But when we want their money, when we need their money, that's when we engage, and we're mostly just asking them to give. What a beautiful expression of leadership and friendship when we engage at the heart level to ask them about them, to wonder what God has called them to with them, to inspire them to actually move in that direction, even if that direction means they give less to our building fund, even if that direction means that they actually are giving the extra above and beyond the tithe to something that doesn't actually benefit us. Great. The kingdom is big, and we serve a God that owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. There's more than enough resources to go around. But when we activate these Lane 3 families in the work God is specifically calling them to, that's kingdom leadership. And so I challenge you, if you are in this place of leadership, whether you're a pastor or a stewardship pastor, or you're on the leadership team, for whatever reason, if you are in a place where this is a conversation you are exposed to, make this conversation about their heart. Make this conversation about what God has designed them to do, and not about you. It changes everything. It makes you more trustworthy in their eyes. It gives them more confidence to follow your leadership, and it unlocks for them things that have been trapped. I know many, many people in this Lane 3 category, and they are burdened by their wealth. They are frustrated with how complicated it is. They're annoyed by the conversations that are always coming to them about, can you give us some? Can you give us some? Can you give us some? It is refreshing and life-changing when we engage these conversations in this way, because it's different. It's so different than what they're used to. And so I believe that we end up either falling on one side or the other, checking out completely and avoiding it because it's intimidating and we don't feel like it's our role, or pursuing them for the benefit of our community, our church, our building fund, whatever the case may be. The thing that shifts lane 3 is pursuing them for their heart, pursuing them to encourage them in their discipleship to Jesus, pursuing them in order to call them to faithful stewardship and honor the whole kingdom with God's resources. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you.